dopamine is made from an amino acid called tyrosine, which comes from meat and eggs and fish, etc. But it won't do anything if you're low in iron, because iron helps to convert that dopamine, that tyrosine, into dopamine. So if you're low in iron, you are going to present with ADHD symptoms, or very likely to be magnified ADHD symptoms. With ADHD, very often there's genetics involved. The ability to generate dopamine is a bit glitchy anyway. So I'm not saying this is the cause of it, but it can be a big factor.
Welcome to All Aboard, where we help parents navigate the ADHD journey. Whether you're at the beginning of this journey asking what now, or you've trodden this path for a while and are wondering what's next, All Aboard ADHD is here for you. We will bring you key information from expert interviews alongside parents sharing their real-life lived experience to help you feel less alone. I'm Claire, and today we'll be talking about how food affects the mood, behaviour and concentration of children with ADHD and other neurodiversities with our expert guest Lucinda Miller. Lucinda is the clinical lead of NatureDoc with over 25 years experience as a family naturopath and functional medicine practitioner. She runs a UK-wide team of nutritional therapists specialising in child nutrition and neurodivergence. Her clinical work is dedicated to helping neurodivergent children and young people thrive using evidence-based nutrition. She is also a coach and mentor for kids with ADHD and autism. Lucinda is the author of Brain Brilliance, a new book which brings together her top nutrition and well-being tips to help kids of all ages and their exceptional brains. She describes Brain Brilliance as a big warm hug to the neurodivergent community and a glow of positivity with lots of delicious recipes to nourish the brain and the soul. Lucinda's mission is to make Brain Brilliance accessible to all and to highlight the everyday challenges that many neurodivergent children experience and struggle with, rather than focusing on the specific label or diagnosis. As she said, a love of food and an understanding of its role in nourishing the brain can help all brains to flourish, no matter what the diagnosis. Lucinda has ADHD herself, and she is a mum of 3. Welcome aboard, Lucinda.
It's so lovely to see you, Claire. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you so much for joining me today. So when your new book, Brain Brilliance, was published, I was especially excited because not only to have an actual evidence-based book, but one that tells us as parents what we can actually do about this stuff. Because often you're learning and you're reading and you're thinking, okay, that's great, but what do I do? And I particularly like Dr. Fry's foreword when he said, this book is an easy to action manual of how to move things forward for your child. And I've personally been really interested in the kind of integrative role of nutrition balanced alongside the traditional kind of medicalized approach. So how does nutrition affect brain function and mood and behavior and all of those kind of key aspects of ADHD in children?
So I think we can all relate to a day where we've eaten really well and our brains are fired up and we feel energized and we can do the things that we want to do. And then there are other days where you might have made some different choices with your food and you can feel sort of slow and low and your brain might feel a bit foggy and you think, oh, I wish I hadn't had all those sweets or whatever it might be. And so I think that's, as adults, we can really relate to that. I have ADHD and I have found that food is one of the most profound things that can affect my day. But then when you drill down to little kiddies who often aren't able to express exactly how they feel, they tend to express a lot through their mood, their behaviour, rather than actually being articulate that they feel foggy or out of sorts, then food can affect them just as much and even more so in some ways because they've got very sensitive brains. And as I said, so often the behaviours that you see can be, not always, but can be linked to what they've eaten. But equally, I think a lot of people think, well, I can kind of get that. But that's a day-to-day thing. And in fact, our work and the work that Dr. Richard Fry does as well is to explore maybe why someone's so sensitive to sugar or why someone slumps after eating a heavy meal or whatever that might be. And often that's a gut reason, a metabolic issue, etc., that can be supported through nutrition.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because, we think about the impact on behaviour perhaps with things like blood sugar level, or actually I see it in my own children, even with just dehydration, the mood in them when they've actually forgotten to drink and the difference when they do. But then actually to go deeper and think, okay, what specifically is happening here? Like what's causing that beyond perhaps the more obvious things in terms of what they're eating themselves or not eating perhaps. So what would be the key brain nutrients that we would need to know about? Especially I'm thinking for things like emotional regulation and concentration, which are kind of two biggies, aren't they, for not just children, but for people with ADHD?
Yeah, so I think that the key nutrient that I bang on about quite a lot is a mineral called zinc. And zinc plays many roles in the body and the brain, but it's the second most abundant mineral in your central nervous system. So it really helps neurologically to balance someone. From the sort of, the most obvious side of things of zinc, it helps with your immune system. And we all know that if we've got a nasty virus or an infection, we feel low and zoned out. So it's good with that. It also helps to create your gastric juices, and that in turn helps you to absorb and digest your food really efficiently. So you're getting the most out of what you're eating. And it also can control sense of smell and taste. And lots of ADHD kids are very fussy eaters. So sometimes that can help too, because then that will enable them over time, if they've got enough zinc in their body, they'll be more likely to choose the healthier food. So that's all sort of helpful. But as I said, zinc is also really important neurologically. And the classic kind of low zinc child is the child that you probably walk around as if you're on eggshells, because you're not quite sure what their mood's going to be. They could be happy one moment and be in a rage the next. And there can be no particular reason for that. You just can't see why they flipped. So it's someone who's almost like a coin that flips incredibly fast and readily. Equally, as I said, it's so important for that sort of sense of smell and taste and digestive juices. So it can be someone who tends to be a bit of an emotional eater, or what I would call a dysregulated eater, as in they're eating, maybe they're grazing over the day rather than eating properly, or they're not hungry in the morning and their appetite sort of kicks in later in the day. And the other thing is social withdrawal. So it's the child that wants to be in their room all the time, can't stand the family being around them, and, just wants to be, is great one-to-one maybe, but not so good with everybody else around, or maybe school refusal. That's another sort of aspect. So zinc is really, really important. And equally, its sort of buddy in the nutrition world is iron. And I think we've all heard of iron. We've all heard of anemia. Now, yes, there are a lot of kids going around with anemia, but there's an awful lot of kids going around with slightly low iron. So the measurement for iron in a blood test is something called ferritin. It's the sort of stores in your blood. And those are meant to be between 12 and 200 for a young child and 12 and 400 for a teenager and an adult. And if you're below 12, then you may be anemic. And they would, that would be explored and supported medically. But for ADHD, and I'll explain why in a minute, you need to have it really at around 70 to 100, which isn't nearly even close to that top 400. It's only about a quarter, but you really do need that level. And the number of kids that we see with sensory issues, mood issues, fatigued, overwhelmed by the end of the day, a nightmare after school, whatever that might be, is often low in iron. And they often are very pale. They often won't eat any red meat, won't eat their greens, not very good with eggs, not very good with pulses. They're the ones that might have a chicken nugget or a piece of pizza if you're lucky. And iron is the most abundant mineral in your central nervous system. So it really is actually even more important than zinc. So again, what's interesting is if you're low in iron, you can get rather a painful mouth and a painful tummy, and your appetite might disappear. So they're often the kids that, just sort of used to be doing quite well, but not doing so well now. They've almost seemed depleted and pale. And it can really drive things like OCD and anxiety as well. So iron is super, duper important. And you can tell if someone's low in iron because you can pull down their eyelid, the lower eyelid, and it should be a lovely bright pink, sort of like a raspberry pink inside. This is what the doctors would do. But if it's sort of pale, sort of almost like a light white or a light pink, then they may well be low in iron. And that's something that you can do lots with. And if you build those levels up, it's super important because in ADHD, this is what's really important. And this was I was going to tell you earlier was that there's a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And dopamine is, I think anyone with ADHD has heard this word. And it's the thing that gets us excited about doing things, motivated about doing things. It basically helps with that, stopping that procrastination and helps with the focus, etc. And dopamine is made from an amino acid called tyrosine, which comes from meat and eggs and fish, etc. But it won't do anything if you're low in iron because iron helps to convert that dopamine, that tyrosine, into dopamine.
Okay, interesting.
So if you're low in iron, you are going to present with ADHD symptoms or very likely to be magnified ADHD symptoms. Now, with ADHD, very often there's genetics involved. You know, the ability to generate dopamine is a bit glitchy anyway. So I'm not saying this is the cause of it, but it can be a big factor. And it would be zinc and iron would be my first two things, my first two interventions that I'd make sure that child or the adults, because we work with adults as well at Nature Doc, have enough of those because it's amazing when you build those two up, how much better they feel, how much more switched on they are. Basically, everything sort of connects in the body better.
Oh, it's so interesting, isn't it? You think about the fact that actually it could present ADHD symptoms in perhaps someone that wasn't neurodivergent or significantly exacerbate them when we're already facing all the challenges that we are. It's so interesting. I mean, you said some things there that I actually wasn't even aware of, things like relation to zinc when you talked about the taste buds and the impact on the taste itself, and actually thinking then the effect that has on a child's ability to actually be able to eat something in the first instance. I think about my son sometimes. His face looks like I'm putting him through an I'm a Celebrity eating challenge when believe me, that is not what he's being presented with for his dinner. And that kind of got me thinking there as well. And in terms of what you were saying about iron and dopamine, which was something that I wasn't aware of to such an extent. And if we're thinking about the fact that, as you were saying, key sources of iron come from things like meat and eggs, but without the necessary iron stores, if that's the right word, we then can't process that dopamine in the same way, and where we already have an issue with that to begin with. But if you're saying it limits our ability to process that dopamine, once we then start to consume more, does that have then a delayed effect, I guess is what I'm saying. So if we are, say, eating meat, is it a case that we're not perhaps eating enough of it? Like my son doesn't like eggs as an example. It's a constant battle. I wish he would eat them, but he won't. But if we're deficient in those in ourselves, and that's having a knock-on effect on our dopamine because we're low in iron, when we're then eating the foods with iron, does it take our bodies much longer to build up sufficient supplies, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to have enough of what we need?
So how old is he?
He's 13.
Okie dokes. So a 13-year-old boy needs about 12 milligrams of iron a day. And a menstruating girl needs about 14, and over 18 women need 18. Okay, so below that, it's about 10 milligrams whilst they're sort of growing. And 100 grams of steak is only about 5 milligrams of iron.
Oh, okay, wow.
A tin of beans, maybe, 4. So eggs, just maybe 1. So there's not that much even in the food that we eat. We need a lot more than you'd ever expect. And so if you're deficient anyway, because you've only ever had chicken and fish and you've never had red meat or whatever that might be, or you've got malabsorption, so you've got celiac disease or problems with your gut, that means you don't absorb your nutrients as efficiently, you might need a lot more. And this is where the supplements are the scaffolding, really, just to help to bring those levels up. So, as I said, the RDA, so the sort of amount you should have each day, are those levels. But, therapeutically, it would be more like 40 to 45 milligrams a day. And, a doctor's prescription of iron would be like 200 milligrams a day. So it's a lot more. And it can take several months to build up, especially if you're not very good at doing it naturally for whatever reason. So this is what you might have the glitchy dopamine system anyway, and you're not a brilliant absorber of iron. Whereas there are other people who, can't have any extra iron because they have something called hemochromatosis, which is, where they actually store too much. So everyone is different. And that's where I think blood tests, either through your GP or through us at NatureDoc, can establish whether this is an issue or not. Sometimes the kids don't like doing blood tests. Maybe they're so dysregulated that would be one step too far. And so we can offer, they're not as up-to-date or accurate, but they give you a good idea of what's going on, and you can look at the clinical history and the diet history. You can do hair testing and urine testing, and that will identify not just iron, but other minerals and vitamins as well. So, you can look at the full picture rather than just the iron. So the GP tests will only really do iron, B12 and folate. They won't be able to do anything else. They do check calcium, but calcium's always okay unless there's a real kind of medical issue. So basically, if you don't have enough calcium, it just depletes it from your bones rather than to show it in the blood. The blood always regulates. So with our testing, we can look at all the vitamins, all the minerals, and really get a good idea of what's going on.
So interesting. So if you're thinking about the malabsorption, as you said then, that makes me think about the kind of gut in general and the gut-brain connection. And I'm wondering, why is that particularly important for neurodivergent children?
So interestingly, I haven't got the numbers on ADHD, but for autism, around 84% of kids who are autistic also have a gut issue. So that might be an allergy, it might be reflux, constipation, and these are medically diagnosed gut issues. So it's a very, very high proportion. So right from the get-go, whether it's bad colic or reflux when they're babies, or very loose bowels, or reflux, or whatever it might be, there's probably been some kind of low-grade or significant issue going on all their life. And that can mean that can have a knock-on effect on how many nutrients you absorb, etc., etc. How good the digestive system is overall, and how easily you eliminate the bad stuff as well, because you want to get the toxins out. And so, but what's really important, so there are sort of two major things that we look at. One is something called pancreatic elastase, which is the amount of enzymes that you produce when you eat to break your food down, to turn the carbohydrates and the fats and the proteins into these mini micro particles, which then can be absorbed into the bloodstream and then into the cells. And that should be over 200. And in a lot of kids, especially the neurodivergent kids, that is 100 or 50 or something. And so therefore, when they're eating, there's not enough enzymes being produced. So they're just not simply absorbing enough of so they can be eating the best diet in the world, and they're often not growing very easily, often quite skinny. So it reminds me of a little boy I saw quite a while back now, and he used to wake up at about 5:30 in the morning just going, sausages. And he literally was waking up so hungry, and he'd eat something like 10 sausages for breakfast. This is a 6-year-old. 2 breasts of chicken at lunch, 3 salmon steaks at supper, that sort of thing. And he was still the smallest in the class, and he just wasn't absorbing. And poor thing, it was just all going down into the loo. Very expensive food.
I was going to say that, expensive poo.
Yeah, exactly. Very expensive poo. So, so that's something to look out for. And then there's something called the gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome is an ecosystem of bacteria, both beneficial and sometimes not wanted bacteria, that's in your large intestine. So where the poo's made. I think we always used to think that part of the gut was just the icky part, but actually it's incredibly important. And these gut microbes think of it like a sort of wonderful meadow full of an incredible ecosystem of different animals and insects and flowers and, everything all living beautifully in harmony. And that's when the gut's really healthy. But then, you have bad weather, things go moldy, there's a bad infection, etc., some pesticides chucked on, then that whole meadow can look pretty kind of dead. And that's where, if you're eating the wrong foods, lots of antibiotics, maybe reflux medications, etc., that can really destroy that diversity, that healthy part of the gut microbiome. And that can leave it more vulnerable to building up infections. And those infections can cause inflammation in the body and in the brain. And that can cause some havoc and magnify quite a lot of the kind of ADHD kind of neurodivergent traits, whether it's tics and twitches, OCD, anxiety, etc. These can all be triggered by those. But equally, those beneficial bacteria, they help with the immune system, they help with B vitamins, they help to dial down that inflammation that you don't want, but also they make your neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are brain chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, something called acetylcholine, which helps with working memory and processing and learning, and something called GABA, which keeps us cool, calm, relaxed, and helps us sleep. And these are some of the neurotransmitters that are not necessarily explored in traditional ADHD support. So the sort of standard ADHD medication will be working on that dopamine and adrenaline axis. But what is often forgotten is the emotional dysregulation and the executive dysfunction that so many kids with ADHD and adults have too. And those are more likely to be controlled. It's, everything's being, still sort of researched, etc. But it's thought that it's the acetylcholine and the GABA that is vital for those aspects of ADHD. And it's not just a glitchy dopamine adrenaline thing, that actually it's a sort of glitchy neurotransmitter overall picture. And this is why ADHD can present in so many different ways. So, as a family, four of us have ADHD. I'm more of the sort of hyperactive. My husband is more inattentive. Our son is more executive function. And our daughter's more the sort of anxiety side of things. So, we've got 4 very different types of ADHD. But it's all been diagnosed by psychiatrists, as the same thing. And so these gut bacteria, which are all nourished and cultivated by what we eat, are so important. So the gut bacteria is created essentially by foods that have brightly coloured pigments, or known as polyphenols or antioxidants. So things like dark purple in blueberries, the green in green tea, the orange in oranges, the red in raspberries and strawberries. So these are all really, really helpful at creating this lovely diversity in the gut and encouraging those lovely neurotransmitters to thrive. Equally, cultured and fermented foods, so things like yogurt and its cousin kefir, and then things like sauerkraut, kimchi, apple cider vinegar, miso, etc. These all, again, encourage the growth of this beneficial bacteria. And what's really interesting is that lactobacillus, which is in yogurt and kefir and milk products, there's a little bit in things like sauerkraut as well. But this is specifically to help make the acetylcholine and the GABA. So it helps with the learning, the working memory, executive function, that whole anxiety axis. So it's super duper important. And very many kids that are neurodivergent are also dairy free, maybe because they had colic, etc. when they were little. And sometimes when you rebuild that gut bacteria, and you can get dairy-free probiotic supplements, for instance, and encourage the other foods, then over time, that can really, really help with the learning and all of those aspects. And equally, it can help with sleep. So often probiotics can actually help a child to sleep better, which is amazing.
It is amazing. And it paints such an interesting picture. I mean, I liked your description of a meadow because I think that makes it particularly easy to visualize and understand. But it really does make you kind of acutely aware of, as a parent, that actually what you were saying when we were beginning this was the example of the young boy who was eating all these amazing foods and wasn't absorbing them, so actually wasn't getting the benefit of those. But then there's the other side of it, where we have a situation where perhaps a lot of neurodivergent children are eating a lot of ultra processed food because, I mean, it's obviously particularly difficult being a parent, never mind a parent of a neurodivergent child. We can be time poor and they can be particularly fussy eaters. And there's then the knock-on effect of that. Like one mum in my ADHD Winchester community I was speaking to her recently, and she's a doctor, and she was saying that her son typically will only eat chicken nuggets. And she knows that nutritionally that's far from ideal, and yet he needs to eat. And I'm just thinking about that in relation to what you were saying with regards to the gut bacteria itself and how particular neurotransmitters change the way in which our ADHD presents, or indeed perhaps exacerbates it. And if we're not able to help our children in certain circumstances get what they need to benefit them or to get the absorption that's required, I'm kind of interested to then know what role those processed foods play on an ADHD brain, our children's brains, and then how as parents can we manage that in those situations?
So ultra processed foods are highly addictive and they give you a really good, quick dopamine fix. So if you've got a child that is seeking dopamine regularly, then they're going to be drawn to these foods. And in the UK, they're incredibly highly available as well, way more than most other countries, especially in Europe. So it's become a very normalized part of a way to feed a child, whether they're ADHD or not. But if they've got sensory needs, then often it's encouraged as well right from the beginning. Now, what's really interesting is when you read the studies, you find that a lot of babies who then later on get a diagnosis of ADHD or autism or some other neurodivergence, they're born with a low zinc status. They're also born or acquire a dysregulated gut within the first few months. And that can be because they needed a high dose antibiotic or something for a nasty infection, which saved their life, but, could have skewed their gut. So what can happen is these nutritional aspects can be present in them really right from the start, but you won't know because you've got this cute little baby and, they're not able to articulate that to you or show it in any way. But what might happen is they might be more uncomfortable, they might be more unsettled, they may not sleep so well, etc., etc. They might find that whole weaning process a little bit harder or get more infections, more loose bowels, dirty nappies, etc., just that sort of thing. So there can be little hints, but it's still difficult to know if it's that or not. And of course, if you're low in zinc, then as I said, you might not ever have found that food that yummy or that exciting. And zinc, because it affects you neurologically, can also affect the mouthfeel. And as I said, the low iron can affect the mouthfeel as well. So you could have, a baby that has started their feeding journey not that excited about it because you don't get that ultimate sensory experience from what they're eating. And especially if you maybe, and this is not a criticism of any sort, but if you've gone down the pouch route, again, they all taste a bit samey, lots of apple in there, and the same sort of texture, etc. So again, that may not have inspired their taste buds that much. So they may have started out life, and there are so many genetic reasons why you might be low in zinc, as well as environmental reasons. So again, this is just something that has been established that these things are very, very common. And so therefore, when you are eating, what are you going to eat? You're going to eat food that gives you some sort of sensory stimulation. So it's going to be crunchy. It's going to be something that feels nice in the mouth. Or a lot of kids with neurodiversity also have hypermobile joints and have quite low muscle tone. So they actually find the whole chewing experience and swallowing quite hard too. So you give them suddenly a rice cake or a corn puff and it melts in the mouth and they haven't had to chew. Brilliant. Love that one. That's an easy food. But that's not going to be so good for their speech development or kind of their food exploration and journey. So I say the first 3 things that I would try, and the first 2 are the most important. But the first 3 things I try, if your child is incredibly resistant to trying new foods, is to, if you can, try and get zinc drops into some apple juice, into their porridge, whatever they'll eat. I don't mind if it's in ice cream or Nutella. It's get it in, right? Yeah. And that will help with the sense of smell and taste. It will help the tummy feel more comfortable. Food will just be a better experience for them. Then the probiotics, again, usually tasteless little powder, can be mixed in with the zinc, into yogurt. I don't mind what it goes into. And again, that is brilliant. And that will help to stimulate those neurotransmitters. So again, the brain's going, this is nice, rather than, oof, what's that? It's scary. And then if you've noticed that there's lots of bloating, maybe undigested food in the stool, or just some sort of disrupted gut issue that is pretty obvious, then I go with something called a digestive enzyme. And that helps fix that pancreatic elastase aspect I was talking about. And those 3 things together can change a child in 6 to 8 weeks. And I'm not promising you that's going to be for your child, but it might do. And on my Instagram, virtually every day, I get an amazing story in my DMs saying, oh my goodness, I've just tried those 3 things, or 2 of them, and my child has gone from a food refuser to a food lover. So it is possible. And but what's really important to realize, that when a child is going through a growth spurt, so often around sort of 7 and 8, and then, sort of 11 plus, when they're going through puberty, they need a lot more. And that's a time where we often see kids who were doing quite well. And the parents say, well, I didn't really spot ADHD in them earlier, but they seem to just be so dysregulated, and school are sort of thinking that they probably got it too, bloody, bloody, blah. And actually, it's a time where suddenly their nutritional needs have escalated, but they haven't caught up with their diet. So they need more iron, more zinc, etc.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Because anecdotally, those are the 2 points that I see, in inverted commas, people coming to want to talk to me the most. Those are the 2 stages, around 7 or 8. And then, as you say, if it hasn't been picked up already, then going into secondary school. So I find that fascinating. And what you were saying about zinc there, in its relation to almost your selectiveness with what you eat. Like I did not know that at all. And it makes me think about my son, because everything you were saying, my brain was bouncing backwards and forwards between my 2 children. So my brain's working overtime here. And my daughter's just recently been diagnosed. But if I look at my son, for example, he's 13, and actually as a baby, he was an amazing eater, and he did have pouches because he didn't really like purees, but he also did that kind of more baby-led stuff where he was eating himself. And then as a toddler, he ate almost everything. The only thing, ironically, I mentioned eggs earlier, he would never eat eggs, and he didn't like kind of spicy, hot things. But other than that, he ate everything. And then that changed so significantly for him. And one really interesting thing that's come to light recently, and I'm just thinking about what you're saying there, is that so he recently changed school, and in the process of that, which was a big change, my focus was very much on the kind of learning needs and the pastoral needs and all of that stuff. And the thing that I completely overlooked in that equation was his food, because I think that as a parent, you get so used to accommodating your child's needs when it comes to that. And you realize slowly over time how much what you're eating and even buying shifts so much. It wasn't apparent to me that it was something that I should raise and flag, other than say, because he does take ADHD medication. So, from an appetite suppressant perspective, but beyond that, I didn't consider it that it would be an issue. And actually, it's turned out to be the one area where he struggled the most. And I would say at times it's almost as, I don't know if it's as extreme as it's ever been, but I think I'm noticing it more now, that there's almost a fear of food. He's become exceptionally picky and highly selective, perhaps because he has less control versus maybe we would have had before, and with what we were able to manage and feed, as I was saying. But the knock-on effect then is that perhaps he's getting less and less and less of these key nutrients that I appreciate. Sometimes it's hard to get the necessary levels through diet alone. That's almost becoming a bit of a vicious circle because it's having a knock-on effect, and perhaps maybe even adding to the appetite suppressing nature of his medication, because you mentioned that sometimes they can kind of almost just not feel very hungry or go off food. So what do we do? Because you've got some beautiful, amazing recipes in your book. And actually, I think that many of them, they're super accessible for my daughter. But if I was thinking about my son, or perhaps children who have been diagnosed with ARFID, how can we support and feed them? Like, how can we kind of gently expand their diets and make sure they're getting what they need at the same time if it's having such a significant effect on the way that symptoms present?
So first of all, teenage kids, as I said, have a much, much higher need for these nutrients like zinc and iron, etc. Now, with boys, turning from a young boy into a man takes up a lot of zinc. So zinc helps to make testosterone and all those things that, build all those muscles and make them all hairy and all that sort of stuff. Okay. And often there's acne going on as well. So, or the beginnings of acne. And again, you need zinc to help with your skin. Okay. So if he's not growing as fast as he should, that's another sign of low zinc. Okay. With girls, it's often low iron at this stage because they started menstruating, and they often almost look a bit grey in terms of their sort of white. They often become very grumpy and difficult to access. And, it's that really difficult teen moment that everyone thinks about, when they think of those sort of stroppy Kevin teenagers, it's that kind of thing that you get when there's low iron. So these things usually do need to be supplemented at that stage if the food is so narrow. And luckily, zinc capsules are tiny, tiny, tiny. So, and you can put drops, as I said, in juice or whatever. So zinc and things like iron, you can get sprays and things like that. So it's not impossible, especially if they like sweet things, and they often do. But in terms of the food, what to do? You need to meet them where they're at. So if they love pizza, find my pizza recipes. I've got a really good red lentil pizza on my recipe finder. And I'm going to tell you a story about this one because it's a fascinating one. So 12-year-old, I'll call him James. That's not his real name. Has been excluded from 6 schools. He's been told that he is unteachable and that the next school should have a 10-foot wall. So you can see where we're going with that. He was in the summer escaping every night from home and going to the petrol station, filling up with Coca-Cola and loads of sweets and things like that, and then jumping on roofs, chucking rocks and stones at cars, and basically just disappearing for hours on end, and wouldn't go to sleep till about 2 a.m. He had ADHD medication in the morning and in the evening because that was him on a good day, right? I mean, we're talking a really extreme situation. And Mum said, heck, what the heck do I do? And I said, I can't see him for 2 weeks, but this is what I would do. And she said, he's really, really fussy. At the moment, he pretty much, other than what he binges at the petrol station, he'll only have pizza and hot chocolate. So I said, oh, we can do that. So I said, and they had to be gluten-free because the family was celiac as well. Not him, but there were some of the other family. So anyway, they did the red lentil pizza. And she sent me the most fantastic picture of him chomping. I mean, he ate the whole lot. And then we supercharged the hot chocolate with everything from collagen. We put some magnesium in there, which is a really good mineral for calming kids down, or something called theanine, which is normally in green tea, but without the caffeine. And again, very calming. So, and we just made it, just made sure it had some protein and healthy fats and all sorts. So it was a really supercharged, but it still was lovely and sweet and nice and what he liked. And I kid you not, I spoke to her 2 weeks later and she said 70% of his behaviours have gone away.
Wow.
He's now not needing the afternoon ADHD medication. He's now asleep by 8.
Wow.
Yeah. Extraordinary turnaround. So, as I said, it might seem impossible, but you meet them where they're at. And this is why I've become a bit of a waffle maestro. And I've got waffles in all my books and on my recipe finder. I develop a recipe each week, which goes out in our newsletter. And in the newsletter, there's also a blog. So those recipes are, some of them, obviously there for, adult ADHDers like myself who need to benefit from good food. But there is a sort of section called sensory, which is specifically for kids who like sort of mainly beige, crunchy food or sloppy food like sort of smoothies and yogurts and things. And I've pretty much found a healthier option for everything. And it's amazing what you can get in a pancake. It's amazing what you can get in a muffin. You can supercharge that bolognese. And so what I would do is make one change at a time, literally. And it could just be, say they quite like porridge for breakfast and it's ready brek, right? So then you get some good quality jumbo oats and you blitz them a little bit to make them soft, but it would still be the same consistency. And then you would put, say, really good, thick, creamy organic milk in there rather than water. Then you might start putting, a sprinkle of flax seeds, which are ground up and you can't even taste in there. And then add some more and add some more, add a bit of honey. Then maybe say, oh, he quite likes banana. I might just put a couple of slices of banana. Oh, he liked that. Let's put some more in. And you just slowly, it's called chaining. And you just basically slowly change something.
One thing at a time, almost.
And I mean, there are kids, as I said, who will, and we regularly at NHDoc see kids who only eat 2 to 5 foods. And those are the ones that need the supplements to begin with to kind of reinvigorate the whole system and get things rejigged. But in most kids, they will probably eat, 20 to 30 foods overall. And actually, there are ways to supercharge things and get them in charge as well in the kitchen. If they like smoothies, so if they love, an innocent berry smoothie, buy all the ingredients, make it at home, and then maybe add, as I said, a big chunk of almond butter or some chia seeds or something like that. And they won't even know the difference, but it's still got some extra nutrition in there. So it's sort of slowly weaving everything in rather than, I always say, the people that jump in too fast and make too many changes are the ones that they kind of knee-jerk in and knee-jerk out. And so within a month or so, they've gone back to what they normally did before. Whereas actually, if you make slow, consistent changes that everyone loves, and you'll cook for everybody. So enjoy those pancakes together, enjoy those waffles together. I do. It's great. Waffles for breakfast, amazing. And so slowly it becomes what you eat as a family. And at weekends, do have a big bake-a-thon and use some of the recipes. There are saffron cookies. Saffron's brilliant for focus and concentration. You know what I mean? It's just educating them as well with these ingredients, because at the top of each recipe, there's a little kind of intro about why the recipe is good for the brain. And they love engaging with that. So a 13-year-old would really love that. If they were making, my tahini and black bean brownies, they'd be really surprised with the ingredients, but they'd love the outcome and it'd be fun making it together.
It's interesting. My daughter is now in my mind. She would love that. She'd be all over it. And I know that I'm absolutely going to be doing that with her this weekend. My son probably less so, but he is almost making me think much more about what you were saying, that it's the other side of it then. It's the approach of focusing on the needs perhaps of zinc. In doing so, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, that then I can build up his, I don't know if tolerance is the right word, but like acceptance, or just even remove his fear, because at times it feels like there's actual fear involved, and get him eating the right things again and build his confidence back up again, I guess, with food.
Yeah, absolutely. It does take time. And so, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But I'd say, if you subtly made one change each week over the next few months, by the summer, you'll probably be seeing a very different kid in terms of what he will and won't eat. I don't know about his brain and how he is in his whole sort of demeanour, but I would say that you would probably be able to expand his diet by the summer.
That's like a challenge accepted there, isn't it? I mean, I feel like I realise this anyway, but I'm learning genuinely so much from having this conversation with you. It underlines so significantly the importance of almost the root causes, such as deficiencies, and addressing those as well as the kind of symptoms themselves. I guess is what I'm really taking away from everything that you've said so far, that they are intrinsically linked, they're not separate, and that we can't almost, or perhaps we shouldn't, look at one without considering the other.
So yeah, I mean, the most important thing is to realise that the person will always have ADHD. So, I've been working on my system. So I first got into nutrition when I was 25, and that's when I started studying, and I got diagnosed with ADHD age 31. So despite 6 years of really working on my health, I still had a scattered brain. But I became more focused on working on that. And I have a much, much more robust brain now. But I still have ADHD. It's the way my brain works. And it works for me so well now. And I think so many people can really thrive. When you hear about it being a superpower or people thriving with their ADHD, it's because you've been able to get your blood sugar balanced, your energy, your brain energy working so that it's, not too burnt out. And you feel a sense of achievement. And, things like to-do lists actually work, whereas they didn't before.
I think it is that. It's the holistic approach, isn't it? This is by no means a cure to say that by doing these things that we take away ADHD. Absolutely not. It's about almost doing the two things side by side. So it becomes this holistic approach. You're kind of treating the symptoms, but also acknowledging that the underlying impact on our own individual presentation from a nutritional level, and how we can use that to benefit and improve and, I guess, help our brains thrive and be the best that they can possibly be.
Yeah, I think what it is to think, I've always wanted to get my kids and myself to the point where we don't need to make many or any accommodations when you're going traveling or, going to go to an event or whatever. You're not thinking, it just flows, rather than thinking, oh, well, what if we, do we need some downtime? Do we, it's schedule the stage where actually you've got enough energy and organization and you can think ahead and plan and all those things. So actually, yeah, you enjoy it rather than having to pack your suitcase with a gazillion things and, add on days on either side just to be able to sort of, have the downtime or cope or whatever it might be. And I think that's what it is. And you just want your kids to be, instead of sort of going, oh, it's going to be so tough to feed them, go, right, let's go to this new restaurant, let's eat out.
It's the dream.
yeah, you know what I mean? That's really what we're all aiming to do, rather than having to be limited. I think there are obviously limits in life, but, essentially a life without limits, being able to say yes to whatever you want to.
Aspirational, isn't it? Because when you were saying that, I was really smiling because I thought that's exactly me. Like the most recent time we went away, I knew that the food would probably be quite limited. And so in my suitcase, I had, pasta and cereal and snacks, or I regularly have to build in downtime. So you were literally talking about me there and what accommodations I have to make. So that genuinely does sound like the dream. And you mentioned blood sugar level a moment ago, and I kind of wanted to pick that up because that's not something we've talked about. So from your perspective, how does blood sugar level impact ADHD? How can we, by, I guess, better balancing our blood sugar levels, help prevent some of the maybe meltdowns and that emotional dysregulation and help improve focus? What role does that play for our children?
So the science is emerging from this, but from my clinical experience, which is nearly 30 years, and having lived with ADHD all my life and lived with lots of other ADHDers, I think really where it seems to come from is that a bit like the neurotransmitters are a bit glitchy, equally, the brain's capacity for regulating glucose is a bit glitchy too. So this can mean that your brain is much more sensitive to blood glucose highs and lows. So if you do have something very sugary, your brain is more likely to go into a sort of hyperactive mode, but equally crash pretty quickly and go into sort of more hangry mode. And so the day can be much more roller coaster than I think a lot of neurotypical people might experience. And therefore, things like prioritizing high protein breakfast can make an enormous difference. And what's really interesting is people with ADHD are often really, really trying hard to perform at school, to perform at work, to, not be wriggling, not to be jiggling, to be sitting still, to focus, etc. And that huge amount of concentration involved uses up a lot of blood glucose as well, and brain glucose. So that's why what can happen is they're concentrating, thinking, okay, I've got to get this right, hyperfocus, and then they've used up so much brain glucose that then they crash much more easily. And it's something that I still experience. My mum had both type 1 and type 2 diabetes, so I'm very, very prone to these blood glucose sort of highs and lows, but I'll find that much, much less so than it used to be. But I would do something like, I don't know, write an essay, or even have do a podcast, or whatever it might be, or even just one consultation, and I'd be absolutely exhausted, wobbly, hangry afterwards. Because I had to perform so hard. I had to concentrate so hard, way more than the average person. And so I've learned now to manage those blood sugars. And that happens, as I said, through eating a high protein, high fat diet. So for instance, at lunchtime today, I had scrambled eggs with lots of butter in them. So that's sort of helping to maintain me during the day and this afternoon. And I do sometimes take supplements for my blood sugar. So things like cinnamon I can put in my porridge. That's really helpful. Things like chromium, something called berberine. So there are these things that can help with the blood sugars, makes a massive, massive difference. So you have a much more even day. And so your brain's not so high and low. And so your energy is not so high and low. And you just feel less shattered by the end of the day, basically.
Oh, it's so interesting. I actually think about myself now. In that, I never knew, or I guess I never stopped to think about it in relation to the amount of sort of concentration and mental effort you're putting into something can then deplete your blood glucose levels. Because what you were saying, I thought, oh yes, that's me. I can come out of something and feel actually really depleted because I've almost given everything to it and almost then needing to, I want to say it's not refuel because you're not really refueling, but I'm not someone who's got a particularly sweet tooth, but there's definitely moments where I think I need some sugar, and it's usually after doing some kind of intense work or really concentrating for a long period of time. So that's kind of groundbreaking for me. That's really, really changed my perspective on things and will help me have an awareness of what's going on in those moments.
And it's why people will realise that I'm not anti-sugar. You know how some people are like, if you've got ADHD, cut out all sugar, absolutely no sugar. And I understand why people say that, because it can dysregulate people quite a lot. But I think if you have something sweet alongside the protein and healthy fat, then it's okay. So for instance, you might have something like a couple of dates with some nuts.
I was going to say dried fruit with nuts. That's what my son does.
Or, you have a piece of cheese and an apple together. So you've got the sweet and the savoury together. And that can make a massive, massive difference. Whereas I think, as I said, if you had some Lucozade on its own, you'd probably feel absolutely vile.
Yeah. And then just almost repeat the pattern, go up and come back down again. For those who are listening to this thinking, actually, yeah, I probably do need to add in some supplements for my children, whether that's in terms of deficiencies or just not getting enough, or they're recognising the signs that you're describing. What particular supplements should they be looking for? How do they manage the dosing? How do they know if they are high quality enough, if that's the right word? Because we hear a lot about, supplements that are kind of made up of a lot of nothingness. How do we go about that for our children?
Well, obviously, some people will go along to their health food shop and have a chat with someone there. But what we've provided, and this is what we do at Nature Doc, is so we have our clinic where people can have one-to-one support, and we can run tests. We can find out exactly what they need. So what's going on in the gut, what nutrients they need, et cetera, et cetera. We can do all of that. We can look at genetics. We can look at all sorts of things. It's great. But that's not necessarily accessible to everybody. And so we also have an online shop called NatureDoc Shop, where we stock what I call the best of the best supplements. So this is what I, in my experience, have used for the last 30 years that I think are really, really great supplements, not only for quality, but also, kids will actually take, or you can get in somehow, as I said, by putting drops in pancake mixes or whatever it might be. We run a service where people can email us or DM me on Instagram, and my team and I will reply to you with some basics like, hello, I can really relate to the zinc picture that you've been talking about in the podcast. I'd really like to find a zinc that's suitable for my 13-year-old child. Or I've got a 14-year-old daughter with ADHD and I'm sure she's low in iron. I'd love to, explore that. So we can help to select the right one. And in the back of Brain Brilliance, there is a chart with the basics of there's something called RDA, which is what you should have every day or most days to keep yourself kind of healthy. And then there's something called the UTLs, which is the upper limit, basically, that's tolerable. So that means that if you take more than that, you might experience, say, a runny tummy or something like that. So you may not want to take too much. And there's quite a difference between the two. So you can think, okay, therapeutically, I need a bit more than the RDA because I know they're low, but I don't want to go above the UTL. So you take something in between. So that's if you want to do your own work. But we, as I said, that's what we do as a team, is to be able to provide that. Just as I said, as sort of, it's the same advice you get at a health food shop, which would be essentially, I'm coming in, I'm looking for a probiotic, don't know which one to choose, and we will help.
I'm sure you'll be inundated now with those requests because, what a phenomenal service. As you say, it's not accessible to everybody to do these tests. As insightful and eye-opening as they are, it's just not something that everybody has the capacity for. So to be able to come to you and straight away get some advice, as you say, the best of the best, and know that you're giving your child something that can really help and start them on this journey is just amazing. So on that note, what one final piece of advice would you like to leave parents listening to help them feel less alone on this ADHD journey?
So my one takeaway, my one piece of advice that would really help parents is to first realise that you're doing an amazing job already, and your kids are so lucky to have you as their parent. And it is possible to change their diet over time, but don't be disheartened if they're not changing straight away. The supplements can be incredible and they can be seen as scaffolding until your child is willing to change their diet. And I hope that you do make at least one change and see if that makes a difference to your child, whether they're sleeping better, eating better, just a bit cheekier and happier around the house, slightly better school reports, whatever that might be to you. That's really important to me. And I just want your children to really thrive and enjoy their ADHD brains, because it can be a superpower.
Absolutely. I am so with you on that. As cliched as it might sound, it absolutely can be a superpower. And I love the notion of scaffolding. I think when everything I've learned or read so far, nutritionally speaking, or in terms of, supplementing for deficiencies, I've never really considered until our conversation today how much of this, in some of the early stages and the small tweaks you can make, act as scaffolding that can then lead to natural improvements in things like what they're willing to eat, their diet, which obviously then has a knock-on effect, and the sleep itself. So thank you so much, Lucinda. I'm going away to pick up the zinc conversation, and I'm sure many people who are listening today will do the same. So thank you so much for your time.
Claire, it's been a magic conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me on, and catch up with you soon.
Thanks, Lucinda. If you'd like to learn more about the link between nutrition and the ADHD brain, Lucinda's NatureDoc clinic, or to buy a copy of her book Brain Brilliance, then please do check out our show notes below for more information. Or if you'd like to find out about how I can help support you and your children with personalised ADHD coaching, then please do head to allaboardadhd.com. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at allaboardadhd. Most importantly, if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, Please can you follow and review All Aboard ADHD wherever you're listening today to help other parents find this podcast and welcome them aboard our journey too. Thank you for listening to All Aboard ADHD.